A hungry wolf goes hunting alone without its pack when it notices something disturbing. It sees a dog being mistreated by its owner and prepares to attack. The wolf grabs the dog and drags it into a forest. Then it does the unthinkable. A faint scent of blood fills the nostrils of a male wolf stalking the woods of North Dakota, hunting for food that would hopefully sate his hunger for a while. Could it be the smell of fresh blood from a wounded animal? He could not be too picky, as he had not been lucky with hunting for days and had to rely on whatever animal remains he found in the forest. As his keen senses stayed alert for any prey, he followed the scent trail, hoping it would lead to his first meal of the day. But what he was about to find would force him to make a difficult choice. His steps barely made a sound, and before long, he found a very disturbing scene. The source of the unfamiliar scent. In a secluded clearing right beside a stream, he saw a poacher maltreating his dog without a care in the world for how the creature felt. The dog looked unhealthy. Its fur had bald patches, and its body had bruises. It had possibly not eaten in days as its ribs protruded. The man was armed with a rifle, and his face was twisted with malice as he cruelly yanked at the leash of the poor dog. It whimpered in agony, but its owner kept shouting and kicking at it. The wolf watched through the thick bushes, softly growling as he felt the defenseless dog's distress with each violent action from the poacher. The poacher was unaware of the wolf's presence and kept on with his harshness toward the defenseless dog. He soon turned his rifle on the dog as if he was going to shoot it. The dog shrunk in fear. What had it done to deserve such cruelty? It had always been loyal to its master and never once betrayed him. That was not the first time it had been abused, but the poacher had never used his gun on it. Meanwhile, the lurking wolf could not keep on watching without doing anything. He was initially drawn to the bountiful game the poacher had caught. The sight was too tempting to ignore, and his hunger grew even worse. But he also couldn't keep his eyes off the troubled dog. It made him recall when he suffered at the cruel hands of another human before a kind soul had saved him. He almost died that day, and he sensed the dog was about to meet the same fate. Besides, if he ignored the dog and went for the prey, maybe the hunter would notice him, and he would have been an easy target for his rifle. Perhaps he could try to grab the game after attacking the poacher. That may have worked out well since the poacher would be outnumbered and in too much pain to react. But this was also a gamble. He couldn't be sure that the dog would turn against his owner even after the abuse. So with determination, he slinked closer, moving deliberately to avoid alerting the poacher. He then lunged forward and snapped his jaws on the poacher's shooting hand before he could react. The poacher howled in pain while his rifle immediately fell to the ground. The wolf quickly grabbed it between his teeth and flung it to the stream, where it vanished into the rapid current. The dog watched the event unfold in horror. It could not believe it had been saved by a fellow animal. The tide had turned. Its owner clutched his hand in pain and realized he was no match for the wolf. So he retreated hastily into the woods, keeping his hateful eyes on the creatures. The wolf had no intentions of attacking him further, so he just watched his cowardly retreat. He then turned his gaze once more to the frightened dog and approached slowly. He was trying to reassure it rather than intimidate it. So he gently nudged the dog and whined softly to communicate his intent. He wanted it to feel safe now that its owner was not around to cause it harm. The dog was initially wary of the wolf. What could have made this large creature act so kindly? What did it want in return? As those thoughts crossed its mind, the wolf quickly grabbed the poacher's prey before turning once again to the dog. It had accomplished exactly what it wanted without much trouble. Meanwhile, he noticed the dog's suspicious gaze. The dog had realized why it had been saved in the first place, but soon enough, it sensed his genuine concern. The wolf kept looking at it with understanding and gestured for it to follow him into the woods. But the dog could not move. One of its paws was bruised badly. It tried to limp, but the wolf noticed. It felt sorry for it and grabbed its leash to drag it into the forest. The dog allowed itself to be guided to safety, thankful for having survived such a dreadful experience. With cautious steps, they both navigated the greenery. The dog sometimes limped when the wolf could not drag it much longer, while the wolf led the way, given his knowledge of the land. As they went further, the dog gradually began to trust the wolf and could not help but admire his agility and confidence. And even though it had no idea where it was being led, it had nowhere else to go. The wolf had only one place in mind to take the dog. Upon seeing the dog's pitiful form at first, he instantly remembered a man he met one fateful day in the woods. That day, he had fallen into a poacher's trap and was lucky enough to have been noticed by this kind man. The man did not take advantage of him compared to those who frequented the woods. Instead, he had freed his paw from the trap and mended the injury. Unknown to the man, the wolf followed him to his cabin and often watched as he went about his daily activities. He never forgot that day and knew the man would have surely helped that poor dog. The man was known in the nearby village as Mike. He had no wife or kids, but was loved throughout the community even though he kept to himself most of the time. What gained him popularity was his dedication to his dogs. He had a variety of dogs that he adopted from all around the country. His home was a sanctuary to these creatures, and his backyard housed as many as 20 different breeds. Each dog had its own story. Some had been abandoned by owners who could no longer care for them. Some had been rescued from overcrowded shelters, while a few were runaways. He never restricted them in his home. They wandered as freely as possible, with their playful barks echoing through the surrounding woods. Mike offered them a place to call home so they could heal and thrive. He spent his days tending to every one of them, ensuring they had plenty of love and attention. He took them on long walks through the non-threatening parts of the woods, allowing them to get used to the freedom. He provided everything the dogs could ever want, and that was precisely where the poacher's dog was meant to be. Hours passed before the wolf and the injured dog reached Mike's clearing. The wolf paused by the thick bushes surrounding the clearing before facing the dog. He looked serious, but the dog didn't know why they had stopped. It noticed the cabin in the clearing and heard barks, probably coming from the backyard. The wolf knew the dog was too tame for the woods and needed proper care. So he urged it to move toward the cabin and whined softly, assuring it that it was safe. The dog stubbornly stood its ground but still had the injury on its paw, so the wolf was able to push it through the bushes. It was reluctant to part ways with its newfound friend and kept growling, but the wolf did not change his mind. Their time together had come to an end. The dog had no choice but to move toward the cabin. It realized that it was useless to force itself back to the wolf. Upon getting to Mike's door, it scratched at it weakly, hoping someone would notice it in time. Its injury, which it had been ignoring, was worsening. Suddenly, 5 dogs ran out from the backyard, sensing a foreign presence in their home. They barked at the injured dog and soon got the attention of Mike. He opened the door, wondering what all the noise was about. He was in for the shock of his life. As he stepped through his door, he spotted the injured dog and noticed how bad it looked. Where did the poor thing come from, he wondered. He looked around, thinking he would have seen whoever left it, but found nothing. So he quickly got to work, shooing his dogs away to avoid overwhelming the newcomer. He then gently carried it into his home, ensuring not to touch its injury for fear of worsening it. Before entering the house, the dog gave one last bark toward the woods, acknowledging its savior. Little did Mike know that the wolf watched through the bushes. His amber eyes tracked the dog's movements, and he remained in that spot until Mike opened his door. Once he saw the dog was in good hands, he returned to the forest. He had no idea that this thoughtful gesture would one day lead the dog to do something unthinkable. Mike named his newfound pet Max. He gave all his dogs human names because he believed they were as deserving as people. He examined Max thoroughly once they were inside his home and noticed he was in an even more terrible state than he had imagined, both mentally and physically. Through the layer of dirt, the dog had sores all over its body. His leg injury looked almost infected, and it was limping badly. His eyes were depressed as he gazed at Mike distrustfully. Without wasting any more time, Mike began to treat Max using his first aid tools. Fortunately, he had restocked his medical supplies and had everything he needed for the treatment. After a few weeks, Max was a completely different dog. The injury on his paw was fully healed, and his limp was gone. His hair also grew in healthy patterns, and before long, he had a shiny coat. He became robust and grew bigger than his previous size, thanks to constant healthy feeding. He lacked for nothing and bonded very well with the other dogs. He also became devoted to Mike, to whom he felt grateful for welcoming him into his family with open arms. On one of their walks in the woods, Mike and his dogs went deeper into the forest than usual. Suddenly, Max stopped and sensed something was wrong. Mike called out to the other dogs and stopped them from going further. Then he went to Max and asked, "What's wrong, buddy?" Max kept sniffing the air, but moments after, he sharply ran into the forest, jumping over ditches and fallen trees. Mike was alarmed. He knew he couldn't keep up with Max's fast legs, so he gestured to his other dogs to follow Max, hoping they would make it. Still, he followed behind, running as fast as possible. The dogs caught up with Max in no time, and Mike soon joined them. They were in a less dense part of the woods, and he was appalled when he witnessed the scene before him. An armed poacher was closing in on a helpless wolf caught in a snare. The wolf had no chance of escaping, and the poacher knew. He grinned wickedly, unaware that Mike and the dogs were behind him. Apparently, Max had sniffed his old owner's scent in the air and was able to track him down. The poacher was the same man who had tried to kill him weeks ago, and he was now attacking the wolf that had saved him. The poacher clearly never forgot losing his dog to the wolf and wanted to get back at him. Max had also not forgotten and did not hesitate to jump to the wolf's rescue. If not for the wolf that saved him, he would never have found a family with Mike. So he had to repay his kindness. Max acted fast, even before Mike got to him. He burst out from the underbrush, barking furiously and snapping at the poacher's heels. The poacher did not expect the attack. He was startled, which caused him to stumble backward. His grip on his firearm faltered for a moment, but he regained his balance and kicked Max away. At that point, Mike and his dogs had noticed the situation. Still, Max was persistent in getting his old friend free. He ran back to the poacher and jumped on him, this time targeting his arm. He was bigger and stronger than before, so he was able to overpower the poacher after only a brief struggle. Mike signaled the other dogs to join Max in neutralizing the poacher while he approached the trapped wolf to release him from the snare. Once he was freed, he noticed that its paw was only bleeding slightly and wouldn't need medication to heal. The wolf whimpered gratefully and licked his wound. Mike then turned to the poacher, who lay on the ground, covering his face in fear as the dogs barked at his face. Mike silenced the dogs and refrained from harming the poacher. He then called the local police, intending to hand him over as soon as they arrived. Max knew his work was done. He turned back to the wolf and leaped at him with joy. He buried his forehead under the wolf's jaw affectionately. The wolf recognized Max and moaned softly as he reciprocated the embrace. They stood like that for several minutes. Mike, who watched them from his position with the poacher, was dumbfounded at the sight. This was the wolf he had freed from a trap long ago. He looked on in awe, wondering how Max knew this wolf. They seemed too familiar with each other, he mused. Perhaps they had been friends in Max's old life. Regardless, he was moved to tears as he watched them. Their strong bond was evident in the way Max rushed to help the wolf, not caring about being hurt in the process. It was a moment that would always be with Mike. Proof that animals were more devoted to one another. What an incredible story. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so please leave a comment below. See you in the next video.